This first discussion of the day, and the entire day really, is intended to be something a bit forward-looking. I do not think we particularly want a backward-looking assessment of where things have been. But of course, we are in an election year. The Commission is, Europe is facing a European elections in June, and of course there is the big US election in November. So it is the time to also consider what kind of vision and agenda do we want for the next 4 years, the next 5 years, depending on where you are. So I want to invite both speakers to just riff with me on a couple of topics. And indeed, we'll talk about digital a lot today, but I want to start from a non-digital topic, because of course digital is a great part of our agenda, but it's not the sole issue that faces Europe and the world generally. So going back to the idea of this pendulum swinging in this post-neoliberal world, you know, there's a position, there's a view that we've gone too far in some of the ways in which we've pursued efficiency, lowering trade barriers, and offshoring, and this has in some sense impoverished European industry. There's been a process of deindustrialization. We need to think about restructuring, rebuilding capacity, sovereignty, resilience, and so on. Of course, we also need to defend against bad national champions, which has always been the concern when you think about industrial policy. We'll talk about industrial policy at various points today, but to start with Olivier, this is an area where, you know, the relationship with competition has always been somewhat unclear, in the sense that, of course, we have state aid rules and we care about how not to pursue investments that are inefficient or don't deal with market failures. But isn't in the world going forward a need for a change in posture in the way we are dealing with industrial investment that states need to make? Is the way in which you think about enforcing, for example, state aid the same in the future?
Well, that shift has already happened. I think it's obvious to everybody under the pressure of the COVID crisis and the energy crisis. So the question is rather now, what is going to be the longer term regime? I never believed that the purpose of state aid was to have less state control, was to have less state aid. It's necessarily not to have more state aid either, of course. But that's not where the ratio lies. I mean, if you look where we are now, we are at a point in time in which we have a wall of investment. If we want to decarbonize, if we want to be successful in the digitization of the economy, and if we want to be more resilient and more competitive long time, and all these aspects are several ways of saying the same thing in a way. There are several aspects of the same issue, because you will not be competitive long term if you're not decarbonized and digitized. So we have all this investment to make. And the problem is, probably for the first time in recent history, these investments are both mandatory and they will not enhance turnover. And that's why they're so difficult to carry by business on a standalone basis, in the end of the day. And that's also because probably demand doesn't move as fast as we would like to. Or look at the consumption of organic products. It peaked and now it's falling down. And it's falling down because it's expensive. So, I mean, you have to manage this relationship, and I don't think there is any way you can manage it without some public subsidy. So that's the first point. Well, the second point is which public subsidies? When I hear everywhere that we should forget about the concept of market failure. Well, first of all, I don't think that would be sound, because, of course, forgetting about the concept of market failure, meaning accepting that public money goes where it's not needed. Well, in my simple, Southwest France man vocabulary, that means a gift, which is nice, but is not exactly the business we're in. So The first reason why we shouldn't make gifts is it's not efficient, and the second reason is we cannot afford it. And if you look at the state of the economy, the mountain of public and private debt, I really don't see how going forward we can work on the basis that we will pour public money everywhere, whether it is needed or not. So we need to be selective. If you don't do it for reasons of competition, you do it for reasons of public finances. Third, we need industrial policy. When I was saying that 10 years ago, I was called a communist in the Commission. I think I still think the same, which is I think the pendulum is well placed when it's in the middle, not extremely on the left and not extremely on the right. And the problem with pendulum shift is they tend to go from extreme left to extreme right without stopping in the middle. But the truth for me lies in the middle. And what does that mean? Well, that means that we need to be selective in where we put public money, because we don't have that much. And we need to put it where it makes a difference, where it makes things happen that wouldn't have happened only with market forces. So that's, I think, our philosophy. I don't see it changing. The last thing I would like to do, and I don't want to be too long, so I will not go on efficiencies. We can go later on that, because it's interesting as well. But we have to manage several tensions, and one of the tensions is tension between the single market or internal relationships and the external pressure. If you give state aids, whatever the intensity of state aid control, state aid will always, to an extent, fragment the single market. That's a necessary evil, in a way. And that's why they need to be controlled. We cannot afford to have a race to the top in state subsidies in the Union, also because we have huge asymmetries in the depth of the pockets. But at the same time, the rest of the world has started to subsidize as well. By the way, we were for long leading in that race. And you need to be able to adapt. And that's why in March last year, we resuscitated, if I may say so, the concept of matching clause. Because everybody was saying, with IRA, it's so great. We close in Europe and we open in Arizona. I said, okay, fine. Well, if you can prove you researched the project in Arizona, you researched the project in Europe, you have the certainty to obtain a given amount of aid and you can prove it, we will match. That was in March. I'm happy to say that we have had one case that Andreas knows well. Not two, not three, one case.
Let me pass to Andrea. Comments on this?
Well, first of all, good morning, everybody. I think it was very marvelous to listen to Olivier, as always, but the message was a bit, everything changes so that everything remains more or less the same. That is the message before the election. After the election, it will change, at least that will be the announcement. And there are reasons, and Olivier has touched them shortly at the end. For sure, we need more efficiency gains in Europe. Member states don't like to hear that, but there can be no alternative to that. And these efficiency gains, member states would like to distribute in 27 different places, which is impossible. And that might explain partly why you had only one of the projects that had matched the matching clause. So I think that we have a very strong argument to make that resilience becomes a more important element of our internal market policies. We have seen it with Russia, that we can very easily explain also to the public that if we go for more integration in the single market for telecoms, it will not only enhance competitiveness of the players, but also resilience of users. We just saw that yesterday the Russian internet has collapsed. We don't want that in the European Union. We see the same, as Olivier has mentioned, in the area of energy. We need much more integration in the energy market. And my group, my party definitely wants to do that. Will it be easy? Not at all, because member states will need to do investments at the border. They hate that because they prefer to do it in the capitals. But that's exactly not the logic of the single market. And therefore, resilience will be an important element, and efficiency gains as well. And maybe one comment. At the moment, we still have quite a lot of money which is not used, because the conditions under which it can be used for member states isn't that easy. And there are reasons to it, because we don't want to jeopardize fair competition in between the players in the European Union. And therefore, 107 will remain a basic principle that also the next Commissioner for Competition will have to check and will have to be the guardian of.
Very good. I mean, if I may follow up, Olivier, I think what Andreas alluded to and explicitly says is that we are in a world in which the imperative to increase resilience, to improve resilience, is very clear. The Letta report, which is going to come out in the next few weeks, is been anticipated as saying Europe is in a hole in terms of competitiveness, and this investments will be necessary. And so what I think is your message a bit more of the same, but the sense is that it cannot really be more of the same in a world in which the needs and the importance of what we need to do is so much bigger now.
Well, I hate to say this, but by focusing on antitrust, you give the impression that competition policy is either the problem or the solution. I'm afraid it's neither. It's a side dish. There's the number of things. I mean, I agree with everything Andreas said. None of this has to do with competition. It has to do with the decisions you take in sectoral policies, in utilities, in securing our single market, advancing it some places. It's regulation. It's a number of things. And by the way, just a side work on state aids, I do not believe you can have a real European industrial policy if you rely only on national instruments and funding. Because state aid's control will always be suboptimal in that way. So I think that's not the problem. I think the challenges that this new paradigm put to competition policy is how do you use competition to make these policies more effective?
Yes.
Let me give you an example. We divided the cost of rolling out windmills by 2 the day we finally managed to impose to the member states to do it through open tenders. And that happened in a year. So this is how you should use competition policy. And then I don't mean to say, and I'll finish with this, that it doesn't pose us challenges. You mentioned efficiencies, Christina, twice already. For me, it's a subject of deep reflections. Because if you think about it, what does resilience mean? Well, at the first level, you could say, well, resilience means diversification. Resilience doesn't mean onshoring or re-onshoring everything. It couldn't mean that, certainly not when you're the first commercial power in the world. You shoot yourself in both feet, actually. But you need to re-onshore some, where you have a very profound strategic dependency on something that is really important for your economy, say ships. But then you make it on the basis of a European policy with European means, if you want to make it in a fair way that doesn't fragment the single market. But for the rest, you will diversify. And guess what? Competition does diversification a lot better than monopolies and champions. So I think we need to, that's the first level of reflection. Second level of reflection, a lot of things that we call efficiencies in our analysis are actually running against resilience. Just take a very simple example, just in time. In reality, what you do when you do that, you make an arbitrage between a short-term saving that is certain and a long-term hypothetical cost that would be dramatic but is uncertain. A human being is such that you always lean for the first one. I guess that the role of regulators is probably to try to correct this bias to short-termism, as it is in general the role of regulators in an economy.
So we'll move on because there will be much more to say on this topic, but I want to go to what is, of course, on everybody's mind too, which is the Amazon iRobot deal and the way in which, of course, Amazon has abandoned it, but on the back of the notion that you were, let's say, likely to block it. So this is a second deal that hits the dust recently. Of course, you blocked I wrote, but you blocked, bookings, I Travelli. So what are we to read into this? Is there a clear indication, a signal for the Commission that there are deals that just shouldn't really be even attempted on the part of some large players? And if so, I agree with it, because it is a time when you think, well, don't go and buy a toy, just kind of make it if you can, or just do something else. But that said, what is the signal behind it? What's the bigger thinking?
I think the signal was given a long time, well, not so long, but some times ago already. I mean, think of Adobe Figma, think of NVIDIA ARM, think of Meta Customer, and even think, just to keep the church in the middle of the village, as we say in French, think about Microsoft Activision. So I do not think we are changing our policy. I think that it is clear that the platforms, to take a vocabulary of the 20th century, in many ways have acquired a lot of characteristics of what we used to call essential facilities. They are an unavoidable trading partner if you want to reach a certain environment. You cannot reach the billions of PC users if you cannot connect onto Windows at affordable prices and reasonable conditions, etc. You cannot reach a number of users if you cannot be ranked appropriately by Google search engine, etc., etc. And this means that these players are developing all sorts of strategies that we have been combating for the last 25 years, either under 102 or in merger control, which have always the same characteristic. Protecting better the source of their power, the core market, and using this power in order to derive all sorts of advantages on other markets, whether they're upstream, downstream, or on the side. All the cases you mentioned are about the same thing. It's about entrenchment, and of course the sophistication of the practices, the sophistication of what they could do, or they actually do, is increasing, and therefore the sophistication of the analysis has to be increasing as well. And that is a real challenge, as well as the number of data we have to crunch. But in the end of the day, at least so far, it's always the same thing. Frankly, you're right. I don't know if you would have prohibited the case, but certainly DG Comp and Executive Vice President Vestager would have proposed to the college to do it. And I have no indication that the college would have had a problem with that. So safe assumption is probably we would have. But for me, it's a relatively classical case, even if it's a bit more subtle. We will never know because we'll never publish the decision we had drafted, of self-preferencing. We think we had a very good case for this, a lot of evidence. And we actually think that this is why Amazon decided to drop the case rather than take a negative decision and challenge it in court.
But I mean, you wouldn't have prohibited this case, this is my guess, 5 years ago, right? Self-preferencing is something which now the DMA in principle takes care of. And frankly, the notion of somehow disadvantaging vacuum cleaner producers seems a very narrow one. You must have been developed thinking around ecosystem, around the notion that these large platforms are no longer sort of possible to assess in the term of narrow theories of harm, because this wasn't true 3 years ago. We passed deals 3 years ago, which, you know, today probably you wouldn't consider acceptable. So there is a shift, much in the same direction as we are going to discuss later today with the US agency. It's not case by case. There is a shift in thinking, it seems to me, which is welcome, but it is a shift.
No, what I'm saying is that this is not as if that shift had happened this year. It's a learning curve. It's much more gradual than what you think. You're right, the cases, and WhatsApp, for example, I don't know whether we would accept it today, but it was 7 years ago or 8 years ago.
That's right.
And this is where we started to say we were lacking the depth of reflection. We had never thought enough about it. We didn't have the empirical work.
Yes, I agree.
So, I mean, like everything, it's not that you wake up a morning and decide, I will change my policy. It takes time.
Absolutely.
And it's also, Mark is here, it's an iterative process with the jurisdictions. The same goes for 102. I mean, that's the very reason why we are now launching the review of our 102 doctrine. Is it we take stock of all this, reformulate it, and from this we will continue on the path. So, but the fundamentals are still the same every, time from the first Microsoft case. Because the first Microsoft case was the same at the heart, but it was less sophisticated. It was less, they got sophisticated along the way, and we got sophisticated along the way. And now we are where we are, and you're right. I mean, for example, if you want to know what we think about ecosystem, you should have a look at booking e-traveling. Some people said it is innovative. Yes and no. Yes, on some aspects, but the bottom line is this is a company that is trying, and it is obvious in the internal documents that led them to this acquisition, to higher the barriers to entry onto the core market from which they derive their market, their power. That's it. And should we allow this? We think not.
Let me let Andrea jump in.
Well, I mean, I'm enjoying this morning a lot. But I love to listen to you, Christine, and to Olivier, but I was a bit taken by surprise to hear that everything has always been like that. And there are some competition dudes here new in the court, in the room, they will say, what, have I slept the last years? Or for sure there is a change. Now, Olivier will rightly argue that it's a gradual change, that in the Commission there were always some lawyers thinking about more to be done, for sure. But there can be no doubt that there has been a basic change. Now you can maybe say it was with the DMA, or it was before the DMA, it was after the DMA, that I don't count on, but I think there is for sure a basic change, that competition in digital markets, because these companies went so much beyond what we have been in our competition policy concept so far, that there is more often a decision to be made. And these decisions you have to make for sure technically sound, but you need also a front runner to do it, because it's not popular. And the courts are the safest haven in that area, because the rules that they apply you can rely on. The politics is much more difficult, and we have seen in the last years, unfortunately, commissions where this let's say motivation to fight and to have a very clear concept of fair markets was maybe a bit less strong, maybe. And I'm sure that after the election you will hear plenty of speeches in the European Union that we should do much more and so on, but that will not be possible because we are bound by the law. But that we haven't had a change, I think, in the last years, that would be a bit naive to ignore that. And it's a change at worldwide level, because these companies went so much beyond what we could imagine before that there was a need to do that.
Let me go to the last topic, because, of course, we are pressed for time. DMA, we can't really not talk about that. I don't want to talk about the implementation, because that's underway. Again, I want to take a forward-looking position. DMA 2.0. Where is it going next? There are areas which we know have not been covered. I mean, of course, the low-hanging fruit have been dealt with, but there is cloud, there is AI, which is, of course, around the horizon. So where next? And, of course, this is a question, indeed, also to Andrea, because of the Parliament's position. But, in fact, why don't you start, Andrea?
Well, I mean, to be honest, on that question, Olivier should be here first, because this is now technically to be implemented by the Commission. By the 7th of March, I think we won't make big comments. We see these compliance proposals, we see the Commission reading them, we see that there is still something to be done, but that's in the hands now of the European Commission, and they have to care about that. It's not easy, and we expect them to work hard and find technically sound solutions in the end. But obviously, the first first designations that we saw were the ones that everyone in this room could have done himself. It's not so difficult to say that Amazon is a big platform and Meta is big. We knew that before. More complicated are still cases that we know and use since long time, but where you cannot, at least you have not yet seen a proof how they have been used in an anti-competitive behavior. Free email, free cloud, AI has been mentioned, voice assistance. Is it just a search or is it something else? Because with the search engine definition in the DMA, we have much more rights given to users and to competitors than if it's a classical intermediary service. So there are still questions that are linked to existing old stuff that hasn't been designated yet. And I think if we want to explore the digital space seriously and make it competitive, then we have also to go into these details. That is more complicated. It's also more complicated to explain it, but it's needed to create a sound structure where new companies can really enter.
Olivier?
I agree with, first I agree with what Andreas just said. Here as well, there is and will be a learning curve. I mean, you shouldn't expect us to have bright ideas about what to do on everything under the sun. Certainly not with 40 people. A side message to whoever has a say on the staffing. So you first do, when you have, in terms of scarce resources, you first try to satisfy your legal obligations. So this is what we're doing. It's not to say that the rest is not important. It's actually even arguably more important. It's more important to be, ahead of the curve in terms of helping the DMA to be really, as we always say, future-proof. Because this is your point at the end of the day, how to make the DMA future-proof. But you have a number of other things that you have to do before that. Because this is a must-have in real terms, but it's a nice-to-have in legal terms. We have no obligation there. We have a lot of obligations in other fields, and we need to comply with them. Otherwise, the gatekeepers rightly will put it to court, and rightly Mark will say you were wrong because you didn't do what the law forced you to do, what you had to do. So we first try to do this. It's boring, it's not so sexy, but it's important. And it's actually even important in real terms because we want the currently designated gatekeepers to actually effectively comply. We want it to make a difference for the consumers and for the app developers and for the competitors. We want the DMA to fulfill its function, which I always thought was opening the game. I mean, giving some oxygen to competition that was deprived of oxygen by the power of the gatekeepers. That is what the DMA is about. So now going forward, we have the cloud, we have AI. AI is a pervasive issue in basically all the fields. We have what Andreas just mentioned, which is all sorts of bundling, tying, and it's nothing really new. But should it be designated? Is it a DMA issue? Is it a 102 or national equivalent standard issue? This is something we need to do. I think the only way to effectively tackle these issues, for me, and I know for my colleagues, is within the ECN. Because we need to have a critical mass of brains and man-force that the Commission doesn't have and will not have in the near future. Colleagues have also thought about it. They also have legal instruments. I think one of the best decisions the co-legislators took in the DMA was to enshrine the coordination of enforcement in the ECN. So this is what we're doing, and what we're doing seriously. And when you look both at the current issues and the future issues, the first question we ask is, how can we smartly team up, play our cards? Is it more efficient that Andreas and the Bundeskartellamt take that issue and go and take it forward? And maybe at a later stage, if we see that there is a clear DMA infringement, part of it will come back to us, or the other way around. And we're doing this work really seriously, and I think this is the only way to answer your question. AI is the same. A number of us have launched works on AI, and we will coordinate them within the ECN, because none of us, I think, has the capacity to comprehend the issue by himself or herself. So this is, I think, where the DMA will help us tackling effectively the issue and also bringing cooperation in competition policy in Europe one step forward.
Andreas, do you want to make one final comment on this before we wrap up?
Well, I'm very happy that the solution that we found in the DMA on cooperating between national authorities and the European Commission is so much liked here. I think it's still some work to be done to make that operable, but great. Still on AI, I think that it cannot be pushed to ECN. I think that is something which is too imminent. There is too much money on it. It's too fast growing that we can put it on. But I think one question which hasn't been addressed is that we have not only the basic shift in competition policy, but also some old cases that are done under the old application of 101 and 102, if I may say so. Old is a bit too strong, maybe under the pre-DMA application. And that is still bringing problems to the market, because you cannot apply the traditional view on 101 and 102 to old cases that are still lasting into the DMA times. There is some ways for the Commission to update these decisions.
Let me ask everybody to thank you. I want the next panel to come on. What I learned is that there is a process, that we're learning things. I wish there was more explicit acknowledgement that somehow things are changing in a big way, not in a small way. It's not just gradual, it's a big cliff change, but it was a big change. But thank you so much.
Christina, we're defined by what we do, not by what we say.
That's true. Well, you're doing big things, though. You're blocking deals. Can the rest of the panel come up? Thank you.